we're here to talk about application lifecycle management on the Power Platform. We've been talking about it for a while, released some tooling. There were some issues with it, primarily around multi-factor authentication, and you couldn't connect to the environment. And we encouraged everybody to go and use the build tools. We encouraged everybody to also have multi-factor authentication, which didn't go very well together. So as part of releasing the build tools to GA, we resolved that. So we added service principal support for the authentication. So this is really just to like do a rehash of what we've released, talk a little bit about the best practices, talking about solutions, and then demoing what a pipeline actually looks like. So take it away. Over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Phil Topness. I'm on the PowerCat team. I'm going to be working with Per on these demos. And just to talk a little bit about what we've got planned for you today. So the goal is to give you kind of a general overview, right? This is a broad session here, and it is an NDA session. So we're going to assume that a lot of you aren't coming from a Dynamics background. You're coming from a Canvas apps or SharePoint background. And so we're going to cover some of the fundamentals of solutions and other things you need to enable ALM. And then we'll dive into the DevOps and how you can automate it and use some of the build tools that Per was just talking about so that you can get the, and then at the end, Per will talk more about what's coming and kind of fill in the ALM story. I learn best through demos, and so we're going to be highlighting this through some demos of both building a solution and using the build tools directly. Anything to add, Per?
No, just that we would love to get feedback and questions throughout this session. We're lighting this up to a lot of folks. This is new. It's different than building an app out in the maker experience. Now that you suddenly start using pipelines and automating stuff, so we would love any kind of feedback. How can we make it better? What's great? What's not so good? So we'll add a little survey in the chat as well. So for those of you that prefer to answer through a survey, there's an opportunity for that, as well as leaving your name if you'd like us to reach out to you to chat with you after the fact on how we can make things better for you.
So I'll start. Whenever I talk about ALM, it's kind of a nerdy, esoteric topic, and so I like to just highlight why this is important for everyone, even if you do low code, right? Why do you need ALM even if you're not writing code? And one of the scenarios I always think about is if you've ever gotten an email from your tester who is hopefully testing in their own test environment, and they've identified a bug, and you try to replicate it in your own environment, and you find yourself starting to type an email with those 5 words you've all typed before. We've all typed it, right? It works on my machine. And so that's one of the goals of what we want to automate with ALM is the processes that help provide consistency, so you're not chasing phantom bugs or even real bugs because you couldn't find because of configuration differences and so on. Automate those processes. And then there's another common scenario, super common, even for those that are coming from the Dynamics side, is if you've delayed putting your app into test because you wanted to squeeze in one last feature because you didn't want to take all the time it takes to deploy the code to test. And if you imagine your deployment process, right, too often it resembles something that looks like this. I vote we should watch this guy to the end. This is terrific.
I absolutely love it. So this is what we're trying to improve. I don't know, for those of you that don't know me, I used to be an ISV myself before I joined Microsoft, and this was kind of like what it was like to try and set up a CI/CD. It's still not as simple as we wanted, but it's definitely better. But I absolutely love this piece here. It's wonderful.
And it's worth noting that this has 22,000 likes, right? So this is obviously a common problem. Wait for it. Stick the landing. Rushed it. All right. So that's the goal of what we're covering today, right? The goal is to keep you over on this side building apps and not doing these things that happen too often, right? There's lots of white papers on why management cares about ALM, but this is really about, as a developer and as a maker, why it benefits you. And so we really can't talk about this unless we kind of cover solutions. And so let's talk about the basics of solutions. And solutions, if you haven't worked with them before, they're a container for everything in your app. And so if you've been exporting your Canvas apps as an MS app file, those go in a solution along with the other components. And so if we look like we take this dev environment over here, right, you've got many components in your app. You've got flows and you've got a Canvas app, you've got environment variables. Right? And so to rebuild your test environment, right, one way is to build all those and implement them all one by one, but it's hard to get it exactly right? Like this sock, what if you get the wrong color sock here? I'm colorblind, I could totally do that. And so what solutions do is they give you one package that you could take and deploy to test so that you've got everything controlled and intact. So the goal is to help kind of simplify some of these things, right? Is the code broken or is the environment broken? I had one customer, we spent more time working on their test environment than we did on the app itself, right? That's not the kind of things that we want to be doing. And so let's start with what the manual process looks like of creating and exporting a solution. And Per, do you want to inject anything before I get started on the demo?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Let's see what it looks like.
All right. I've got this app here. It's an impressive app. It's called Click. And what it does, it's a Canvas app. You click on it. You click on this button that's labeled Click, and it tells you to the nearest minute what time you clicked on it. But it's not in a solution. So what I'm going to do is come over here into solutions, and this is the process that we'll actually be automating with the DevOps tools, the build tools. And I'm going to create a new solution. I'm going to call my solution Click. Give it a publisher, and everyone will have these two default ones. It's wise to create your own, and we'll talk about the importance of publishers later. And then this gives me this solution, which is a container for all sorts of things that you can build in Power Platform. And so this one is relatively simple. I'm just going to add in add existing app. I'm going to add in my existing Canvas app. And so now I've added that to a solution. And if I want to deploy this to my test environment, I could then export that. We'll publish changes. I'm going to skip the solution checker. We'll just export it right out without the solution checker.
And I think if there's one thing you should take away, right, it's just that always have things in a solution. Yes, it takes you a minute or 2 minutes longer to get started than create the solution initially, but it just makes your life so much simpler moving forward that you keep things in a solution. So please go and do that. You don't have to use the build tools that will show, but you have to use solutions, please.
So we've got unmanaged and managed, and we'll talk more about those differences too. Kind of the shortcut is unmanaged is like source code. Managed is what you would deploy to test in production, and we're deploying to test right now. So I've exported this as a managed solution. And then it just downloaded right here. So now I'll come over to my test environment, right? Click doesn't exist here. And I'm going to import this solution. And then here's my managed solution, right, number 9. And I'll import it, and then that will take all of the components in the solution and bring them into this environment. And so that's the deployment process when done manually, and that's what we're going to automate here with the build tools. So once that pops up, then we'll come and let's automate that same process, but with a slightly more sophisticated app using the build tools. I'm going to make sure it actually showed up here, right? Proof. All right, so there's Click. So the app we're going to use for the DevOps demo is called PowerCats, or it's called Catfisher here. Here it is in the edit mode in the studio. So what it does, it's a relatively simple app. It gives you an image of a cat. You can name it, rate it, and it loads up another one, and you just endlessly rate cats here. Everything's stored in a common data service, including the images, right? It's got a gallery. It's got 2 flows, one that loads the images and one that sends you an email when you give a 5-star cat so that everyone knows you got a cute cat in the gallery. As an aside, this app pulls AI generated cat images from This Cat Does Not Exist. And if you haven't seen this site, you're going to need the time you save from ALM because you can spend it on the site. I'm going to open up This Person Doesn't Exist. These are all AI generated people. This is not a photo. I mean, this just I can I can hit F5 on this site all day. This is bananas. So yeah, so anyways, Catfisher, what it does is it takes AI generated pictures of cats and allows you to rate them. So I've got it in a solution here, and you can see it's got multiple different elements. It's got a security role. It's got a model-driven app, so we can administer our rated cats. It's got an environment variable, so we send the kittygram email to the right email as we move it through environments. It's got an entity, Canvas app, and the two flows. So let's use the build tools then to not only move this through environments, but put it in source control. And so I'll move into Azure DevOps. And if you haven't used Azure DevOps, I mean, what we're doing with Pipelines is a lot like Flow, and this is free. You already have it available to you for less than 5 users. And so we'll start with this. And if you haven't used source control before, I like to think of source control as like a massive undo button. Like if I, change this file here and commit it, you'll be able to see like all the changes that have been made and who made them. And so you'll have that same level of control for the files that are within your solution. So let's start by building a new pipeline using the Power Platform build tools. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our PowerCat solution and we're going to bring it into source control, bring it into that source repository that we were just looking at. And so we'll create an empty job. And so these run on an agent, so we're going to get a slice of time on a computer. We want to be able to allow it to log in as us when it's running this pipeline, and so we're going to allow it to access our authentication to check these in. And then we'll add a new task. Now, I've already added the Power Platform build tools. If you don't have them installed, you get an option to add them to your environment. And we'll start by initializing it. We'll do the tool installer, and that gets us ready to use them going forward. And then we're going to do the same steps that we did manually before. So we're going to publish customizations, which is exactly what we did with Click. It needs a connection into the environment. This is what Per was just saying. You can use username or password or service principals, depending on kind of what your organization requires. And then next, we're going to export the solution, just like we did with Click. So here again, we need the connection into the environment. This is my dev environment. We need the solution name. And so if we come back here, that is this solution name here, not the nice one with the spaces, although for mine it's the same. So I'll put that in here. But rather than put it in there, we're going to be using that over and over again. So I'm actually going to create a variable for that. So I'll come over here to the variables tab, create a solution name variable. And then we can reuse this variable throughout our pipeline. And then the other thing it needs is an output file. And so we're going to get a chunk of a shared computer where these are going to run, and those have predefined variables and folders. And we can see the list of them here under predefined variables. And in particular, what we care about is a place to stage the downloaded solution. And so we'll use this folder right here. And so we can use that variable as well as our solution name, and we'll download it .zip. Right? Because our solutions are zip files. Doesn't like something. Let's try this again. There it goes. And then after we've exported it, we'll run Power Platform Checker. This is a step I skipped when I did my Click solution, but this allows you then to enforce it and do it automatically for any solutions that are exported from your environment. It needs the location of the solution, which we saved up there, and so we'll just put it there. And it also needs the rule set. We're not putting it into app source. Now, one thing to know, we can configure this. So this step will fail if we have any higher critical steps or any higher critical errors. And so then in that case, then our solution won't be checked into source control. So it allows us to give it a little check, a quality check before we get it in there. And then finally, we'll unpack it. So each one of these is a zip file. And so we're going to unpack it and put the individual components in source control. So we'll take our input file from here, paste it here. It needs a folder to unpack it. And again, there's those predefined directories. So we'll just use the sources directory. And it needs to know the type. And we talked a little bit about managed and unmanaged. I exported an unmanaged solution, so we'll apply that here. And then the last step, we'll check it into source control. Per and his team have provided a nice command line script that will do the last bit for us. So we'll paste this in here. And we're ready to run it. So what this will do is this will publish customizations, export it, check it, and then unpack it and put it in source control. So we have that kind of massive undo button for it, every change is made. And so we'll let that run. And while that's running, I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint. And you want to talk a little bit about solutions there?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit here. For any of you that's been on the platform for a while, maybe just a year even, we kind of did not have everything in solutions to begin with. Even from the Dynamics 365 side of the house, everybody were used to solution, but then we started building out the Power Apps capabilities and Power Automate, and we added virtual agents, and we added AI builders, and we added this 100 things. And granted, we added them a little faster than our solutioning system could keep up with. So for those of you that's been struggling with, having Canvas apps and having connectors and flows in the same solution and it not really working and not being able to update, I do apologize tremendously. It has been a huge focus across the various teams, and we've done a very big heavy lift here the past 6-9 months, and we're in the last sprint now to make everything work better. But now you can have Canvas apps in a solution, you can have flows in a solution, you can have connectors in a solution, you can have Power Virtual Agents in a solution, you'll have AI builder models in a solution. So the new sort of minimum bar that we have for everything we do now is that we are not GA label anything before it is also healthy from an ALM perspective, right? So you're going to see that yeah, we might preview something, but you will know that when we GA it is not only capable of being in a solution, but it also connects well and healthily to the other components that might be in that solution. So we're doing the last few stretches of that here, and come October, you're going to see things like connection references starting to lit up, so that the connection from that you have in dev will actually connect to another connection in prod and so forth. So you'll be able to manage those. We have that in private preview at the moment in the Maker experience itself in UI. We will be adding DevOps tooling to that as well. So everybody's life, if your life is measured by healthy your ALM practices are, everyone's life will be so much better come October. So I think with that blurb, I think the pipeline might be done here. It's still finalizing.
That's what the little microphone button does. Okay. So the pipeline's done, and our solution is that. And if we just look back to the Click solution we downloaded earlier, right? This is full of files, right? The MS app file that we would normally download if we weren't using a solution is there, as well as all these other content. And that's what for our Catfisher solution was extracted and is now stored in source control. So all of those files that make up the PowerCat solution are now controlled in here in source control, and every time we check it in, we'll be able to look at the differences as well. So the next step then is getting things from source control, because source control is going to be kind of our one source of truth, and then create managed and unmanaged solutions out of that. And rather than build that, since we've already built a pipeline, let's look at a pipeline that does that. And so this pipeline uses the same build tools, but what it does is it takes then what we've just created in source control, it packs those into a solution, and it imports them into a build environment. So this is a separate environment, separate than dev, test, and prod, that is only for creating managed solution. So the files that we exported get exported as, or the files that we have in source control get exported as an unmanaged solution, imported into that build solution, and export it as a managed solution. So then we have both types available to us. And it's worth calling out the reason why you want to be able to have access to both unmanaged and managed solutions is having unmanaged solutions allow you to then rebuild a dev environment, right? If your dev environment goes south, if you get a new developer, in addition to the managed solutions, which you would deploy to test into prod. Do you want to talk about publishers at all, Per?
Yes, I want to talk about publishers. For those of you that might have gone in and created a solution for the first time, you'll notice that there is also always a default publisher, and reality is there's actually also a default solution. What we really want you to do is to make sure that you always create your own publisher when you create a solution, so that way you can differentiate what is it that you're building versus someone else is building versus what is it that you get from an ISV. So it's a way for us to identify where the solution came from in the first place. So you should always create your own publisher and create your own solution. Never use the default publisher, never use the default solution. Then a lot of people say, well, but why don't you make it simpler? And yes, we also want to make that experience simpler. So the default should simply just land you in your own publisher and your own solution once you start creating a solution. So we're trying to improve that a lot as well. We have a guiding we have one of many guiding principles is that we really want to try and make it more difficult for you to shoot yourselves in the foot. We've made it really easy for people to shoot themselves in the foot last year, and we're trying to really rectify that and make it simple to follow the right path, because it is very complex to dig yourself out of the hole once you've started creating things in the default solution and pushing things unmanaged to your production environments and so forth. So we're working very, very hard on that. It also gives you the customization prefix and option set values. The customization prefix is nice to have because you can quickly look across all your components and see who actually introduced them, which publisher introduced this. Is something you got from an ISV, something you got from Microsoft, something that you created yourself. So keep that in mind as well. Oh, and Charles is saying very important with versioning PCF controls. Yeah.
So this job is finished, and then associated here and stored in Azure DevOps are both the managed and unmanaged versions of the solution. So you'll always have those available as well to restore a dev environment or to go to test and prod.
So so Nick Dolman had a good comment here. I just want to read that out. That the concept of a build environment seems like digging carrots with backhoe. What's the big benefits as opposed to just exporting a managed solution directly from dev? I agree. It does. The reason we recommend it, let me sort of like maybe rewind a little bit. We recommend that you spin up fresh dev environments when you want to start building an app, and if you want to improve that app, then you spin up a dev environment and import the latest release of that app from source control. If you do that the right way, then export a managed solution from your dev environment might work. The reason that we really want you to run it through a build environment is that what happens in reality very often is that people have a development environment and they start building an app and they go, oh, but I want to test out this little add-on that I got from an ISV or I got from a community site or somewhere else, and quickly you start adding a lot of noise into your dev environment, and there is a risk that some of that noise is going to find its way into the solution that you're building, which means that you're going to have missing dependencies when you deploy it to a downstream environment, when you put it into production. So running it through a build environment just makes sure that you have something that you know can install in a clean environment. So that's one of the main reasons that we really want you to do that. And one of the things we added to the build tools recently, it's a little known feature, is that you can spin up environments on demand and run whatever solution you have through that environment. That's the variable that does that for you, right? So you don't need to have a build environment up and running all the time. You can just, as part of your pipeline, spin up a build environment, run the solution through it, delete the environment again as part of that build pipeline.
And Per, can I add some context to you?
Please.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. So the reason we actually support both mechanics. So the use the managed solution to export it as a build artifact concept, which is what's being presented here. And the other one is to export both and put them both in your source code. The challenge with the both in source code, what ends up happening, just so you're aware of, the real difference between managed and unmanaged solutions in source code today is for the merged components. So things like sitemap, app modules, forms, and stuff like that actually have two variants in your source code. So if you do export both, you'll end up having a managed and unmanaged version of a form as an example. And the unmanaged will have the full form, and the managed will have just the deltas, which is fine as long as you don't start editing one and not do the other. So you'd have to be able to export both every time you do that. So if you can retain the quality of your build pipelines, you can go to the point where you actually put both into source code. But just note that you're going to have 2 copies of all those. Now, for our future here, we're actually rolling out or sort of testing right now a scenario right now for forms to be able to merge both those formats into one. So basically, in the future here, we're going to do it with forms, sitemaps, and app modules and stuff like that to the point where there'll only be one copy of the solution file, and it'll be the same formats. Whether it's managed or unmanaged, it's going to be exporting the merge XML for forms and for all the merge components, which means at that point in time with a single solution file, you won't need to actually go through a build to get another managed solution because your source will equal your managed solution as well.
Thank you, Jan.
And actually,
sorry, Phil, that was a little bit.
That was great. Yeah.
One other key comment here, and I would just kind of want to punch right at what Nick was pointing at. Why would you not just export from a environment as managed? Environments over the life of our product, we started with the idea that environments were a thing, a sticky thing, and that an environment was paid for as an environment, not as capacity. As we have adjusted that outlook, environments are highly transitory now. So truly the idea of being able to check something out, use it, toss it, check something else out, use it, toss it, is something that we've really restructured how we manage environments around. So if your company happens to be in the mode where you have a dedicated test or a dedicated dev environment, sure, take into account what's been said. But from an overall design architecture of the platform point of view, really the only thing we expect to be sticky is your production environment. And what that production environment is up to you.
So I interpreted Nick's question as to why would you not export from dev the managed solution as well as the unmanaged, not just the only going to manage. Like we obviously need the unmanaged so you can actually install it into a new dev. So you need in your source code the unmanaged one. I interpreted his question as to why not just export both together instead of doing a round trip into a separate environment.
Yeah, because that's how I'm doing it now. Like whenever like I put it in source control, obviously to keep track of the changes, but I'll export both. I'll do the managed to go to prod or to test, and then the unmanaged to go to source control. So my original question was this whole build server where we're taking that unmanaged and packing it and doing all the stuff. I was like, okay, this seems like a big intermediate step, but.
Okay. So what I would say is there's 2 supported ways. You're proposing a third, which we don't really support. So you're saying is you want to check out, or so basically you want to export as unmanaged, put to source code, and you're only putting unmanaged in source, and then you want to go to the dev environment and export as managed and deploy that. That would be bad practice. I would say is export both managed and unmanaged and use the unpack task with the /both option to store the combined solution with the variants of unmanaged and managed merge components in your source control system, such that your source control system is always a source of truth and no development environment is in the middle of any deployment.
Yeah, I think it's just changing the mindset to a more Visual Studio type of thinking than like, you know me, I'm an old guy, right? So we were back when we had to pay for our environment, so.
Yeah, but you still use one environment. You don't need to have a separate build environment in that way. But you should still check in both managed and unmanaged in source code if you're going to go without that build intermediate environment.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Should we push forward to the pipeline? the release?
Yeah, let's forward. We'll take more questions in between.
Sure. Yeah, so we'll start off creating a new release pipeline. And then I've got this set up to deploy to QA. And then once it deploys to QA, then it goes to our QA team for approval before going to prod. And so this will start the deployment to QA, much the same as the other, using the same build task. And then we'll see it go to my my test environment here, where PowerCats does not yet exist as a solution. Watch that run in the background. Take a couple more questions, or if you want to talk a little bit more about roadmap, Per.
No, let's take it. There's a very good question here from Mariano that says, but sometimes he doesn't want the entire solution to be managed. Is there a way to have an exception list? And his example here is, how do you deal with final tweaks in a customer environment based on their specific setup? And the way you deal with that is that you have a managed solution that's deployed into the customer's environment. The customer has his or her own dev environment where they also have your managed solution installed into that dev environment. And they build a solution on top of that where they do the final tweaks. And they then have that solution that they build on top. That is what they deploy to the production environment. So you have those two managed solutions in production.
Yeah, and maybe the entire question wasn't around the solution itself, but I'll give you a specific example. What if you have to, what if you have to switch out connectors and things like those? I mean, how do you deal with that if your entire solution is managed?
Yes, so we are rolling out support for these. We call them connection reference. So that is coming a little later, where you can actually define those. So there isn't great support for that, but there will be in a month or two. I don't know, Shan, anything you want to add to that?
Sorry, I was just answering a question. What was the question again?
Like how to deal with that you want to switch out the connections in the customer's production environment, which is an issue today that we're solving with the connection references. So there isn't a great way to do that today.
The environment variables and connection references stuff is all going to be dealt with. So we'll be have healthy DevOps pipeline tasks for that very short term.
That's the biggest headache we have right now, because it all depends on a number of variables. If the customers have, for example, Office 365, if they're not using Office 365, then we need to switch out for the standard platform, email connection. Those kind of things are the ones that are killing us right now.
Well, so if you have, there's two things. There's the one is, how do you transport and ship the things where they can provide their own values of those connectors? But I think what you just said here is that you have two variants of your application based on what, and you're going to use a different connector in your application based on what they actually have in their subscription. And that's, you'd have to build that into your model, either shipping 2 apps or 2 flows with either having some form of branching that uses one connector versus another, or whether you have 2 separate ones and they just wire up the one that is appropriate for their subscription. But yeah, switching out a connector to a completely different connector, we have not put into our model here. It's more of how do we ship connectors or connections and the things that relate to connections through solutions, so that you don't have to edit your payload on import, so that you can actually still have your application running after you import it.
Yeah, and what we were doing internally, and I don't want to hijack your meeting, is we were trying to build some PowerShell script that would actually switch out the JSON payload based on the connection that they had. So thanks for confirming that, at least.
But if you do that, you're going to be in a very unhealthy ALM standpoint, because
exactly.
It's going to store that in the unmanaged layer. So as you ship an update, your unmanaged layer is going to be on top of that, and you'll be frustrated saying, I just shipped an update to fix a bug and they're not seeing it. Why? And their only resolution is to go undo that act of customization. Further,
I mean, you just said it when frustration land at this point. So
so
frustration land.
Yeah, but changes. That's one of the golden rules here is don't do unmanaged changes, because sooner or later we're going to have a switch that in production environments you can actually turn off or disable unmanaged changes, and and those systems that you would build to do those unmanaged changes are going to break. So don't do unmanaged changes. It'll make it difficult to service it. Use other mechanics to give alternates for your customers such that you can support them via managed solutions only.
Thank you. That was helpful.
There's another question here that I know you get a lot, Shan, and I know you have a good answer for it. When will the import process be smart enough to the delta of changes to import rather than the whole thing?
So the real thing with that one is you think of it as there's two types of components. There are components that we ship full row or full component, and that's most of our components. And then there's a couple of them, like I said, about 3 or 4 of them that's ship deltas. So things like form sitemap and app modules are merge format capable. So those will only ship what's changed. The other ones right now today, we have a full row, ship everything. Now, I have it on my roadmap to try to figure out how we can break this down and achieve more fidelity in that, because something as simple as an entity, you've got a lot of these metadata attributes on an entity is audit enabled and is change tracking enabled and a whole pile of those. And what happens is when you ship the entity with the metadata, you get all of the columns. You're not just the ones you've changed. I'd like to move it to a model where we can express via some form of segmentation the ability to ship those settings separately from each other, whether that comes in sort of a merge format of a per column basis, or whether that comes in moving those into individual tables or groups of tables. We have to figure out what the end solution for that is. But it's acknowledged that we do want to have more refinement. So for standard entities, you can ship just the fields that you want changed. But you also have to consider then that you have a dependency on the record also being there in the root too, because you can't just ship a partial row as the base layer. It has to be just an extension above that. Then we have to go through the whole transition factories to ensure that it's very clear as to what you're expressing and that there's no ambiguity. Because if there's any ambiguity in what you might be expressing in your solution file, it's not going to work for us. We'll have to make a decision one way or another, and half of our customers having the desire to do an alternate thing would not be there. So we got to design that one carefully. But today it's a whole row or nothing. And in my scenario there with the entity stuff like that, if you changed or shipped, let's say as an ISV, you shipped with auditing disabled. And into a customer environment, if they had, but you turned change tracking on and you included the metadata in your solution in the customer's environment, if they had for that entity the auditing turned on, you may inadvertently turn it off and you had no intention to do that. And it's just because we're shipping the whole rows and one of the values is audit enabled and your dev environment says no, therefore it'll ship it as no and turn it off in prod, and that may not be your desire. So act on the problem, but we don't have a solution today, but we are thinking about this for the future. Now, from the entity standpoint, there are child components, things like forms, views, and stuff like that. We use the segmentation to be able to do that. It's just that when we talk about a specific row, like in the entity column, or a specific row in a, like for instance, all Canvas apps and all the other ones, they all will go to full row as the export.
All right, back to you, Phil.
You want to? Well, I could show. I mean, for anyone that hasn't seen it, I was going to show reconnecting flow after importing. But I know you've got some slides at the end too, and I've got about 20 minutes.
We got time. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So just for anyone that wasn't tracking that conversation about connection references, this is the version of the app that I imported into test. You see, I have the red squiggles underneath my flow that goes and pulls the creepy image of the cat down. And what needs to happen here is I need to reconnect that flow, and so I can come under here under actions. I can see the flow that's been imported here. When I click on that, it's going to reconnect it and rename it, unfortunately, to load image 2. And then I can just update this reference here, and I've got one hidden down to this button here. And then that will reconnect reconnect that flow and also re-reference it here in this app so that that this again works. And so that was the discussion around connection references, is those would be kind of removed by one layer so that they'll stay with the environment and they'll get reconnected as the app comes in.
So are you saying that's going to be fixed, or is this the traditional process that we still need to follow?
This is the old process here, not the fix. And then the fix.
This is what will be fixed.
Okay,
but,
awesome.
But quite often
in
your dev environment, you can't even get the flow to come in the first place.
Correct.
It just comes up with an error all the time, and
Correct.
you have to do a special flow that calls a child flow. That's all it does, with one compose statement in it, and it's an absolute nightmare.
And while you're fixing it, can you just do it in a way so if I highlight just the segment where that needs to be replaced and reattach the flow, I don't lose all my formula?
Why would you want that? I'm kidding.
You know how many times I've had to go back and refill the formula?
No one do.
Notice I carefully copied that before I did anything.
I know.
I believe that is a topic. That's a different, it's more of a studio question, but I believe that is in discussion. The last step in our release process then is to come back to the release. The prod release is pending approval from my QA team here. So I've got the QA group here. And if I approve it as them, that will then kick off the last step. There's other gates you can use, but that's just a simple gate to make sure that it goes to prod only when you're ready. With that, then, that's all for the demo. Let's switch back to the slides here. Where do you want to go, Per? Do you want to go to these, or do you want to go to some of the ones at the end?
No, I think we should do a health check as far as the end. I mean, it's a little bit on GitHub. It doesn't take long to go through. So let's do a little bit of health check and let's take more questions. Everybody feel free to speak up or write them in the chat. I'm going to add just a small survey to the chat. We're just curious on where people are today. So I would really encourage everyone to take it. It's going to take you about 30 seconds to answer the survey that I'm pasting now.
And as far as the health check, I mean, I think we covered a lot of the stuff. We talked about the publisher. We talked a little bit about segmenting out your dev environments or segmenting out your solution, including for doing unmanaged customizations on top of a managed solution. We've definitely talked about automated process and source control. And we've touched upon having disposable dev environments and how storing your unmanaged solutions allow you to recover those and be able to bring on new devs.
So I think we're getting towards the end here. If there are no more questions, then I think we can wrap it up. Any more? Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time.
Really appreciate you joining. And
this was great, guys.
Do take the survey. Let us know how we can help. Thank you.